So before we start, we will have one of our presenters do an opening dua.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له نشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Ya Allah, we ask you to make this a blessed meeting and spread knowledge and goodness through us and use us to reflect your mercy and rahmah to all creation. Bismillah.
Great, thank you, Brother Hassan. So I want to introduce our presenters tonight. We have, mashallah, a really great panel of speakers for you for tonight's presentation. We have Veronica Laizure, who is the CAIR-Oklahoma Civil Rights Director, Hassan Shibly, the CAIR-Florida Executive Director, and Lena Masri, our CAIR National Litigation Director. And I will be facilitating this, inshallah. So what we'll be covering today, we'll start with a brief introduction to CAIR, and then we'll give you an introduction to civil rights. We'll talk about airport security, give you some tips on what you should know as a Hajj traveler, and then we will review some scenarios with you. And there will be an opportunity at the end for questions. So if you look at the questions tab on the webinar, you can type in a question and we will answer that for you, inshallah. So just an introduction to CAIR. I'll just take a few minutes to talk about this organization. CAIR is the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the country. CAIR's mission is to enhance the understanding of Islam, encourage dialogue, protect civil liberties, empower American Muslims, and build coalitions in support of justice and mutual understanding. So, mashallah, you can see how we're approaching civil rights issues and Islamophobia from a lot of different angles in terms of legal action and education, building coalitions. And that, mashallah, gives us a lot of opportunities to counter this work and counter the hate and bigotry that we're seeing in our communities. What they say about CAIR, and I want to just bring your attention to the first quote. This is a quote by Khizr Khan, who is the Gold Star father. And he said, "Since November 8th, I have been to many communities throughout this country. I have seen the direct result of CAIR's work. I have talked to the communities. I've spoken to the communities where CAIR offices exist. The morale of the Muslim community in those communities is much higher than where a CAIR office does not exist yet." And as someone who works with new chapters and starts new chapters across the country, this is something that I can attest to. When we have a grassroots local civil rights organization in the state, there is a sense of safety in terms of if there is a discrimination case, if there is an issue that comes up, you know where to go. You can go to your local grassroots civil rights organization and get the help that you need. CAIR nationwide, we, mashallah, are growing very quickly. Our national headquarters is in Washington, D.C., and we have 33 chapters and offices. And we continue to grow. We actually just started an office this week. We have opened 5 chapters and offices just this year alone, and plan to have 7 to 8 by the end of the year, inshallah. So we are growing, but there are states currently that do not have CAIR chapters, and we are always looking for individuals that are interested in bringing CAIR to their states. And even if you yourself, are busy with other organizations and, may not have the time, we are open to doing outreach events in the community. And so you'll see on the slide a list of states where we don't have CAIR chapters and are looking to increase outreach efforts. So if you're from one of those states, please do contact us. We'd be happy to come out and do an in-person know your rights training, a counter Islamophobia training, or safety training, or any other training or service that you would like. This is a picture of our CAIR team. We have over 200 board and executive committee members across the country. We have over 110 staff across the nation, and alhamdulillah, we have nearly 40 attorneys on staff across the country. Some of the critical issues facing Muslims, many of you have seen our civil rights reports. If you haven't, go to Islamophobia.org and look at our anti-Islamophobia report. And this just really highlights the current situation that we're seeing. We are seeing a rise in Islamophobia and fear-mongering, hate crimes, mosque opposition cases, workplace discrimination complaints, racial and religious profiling, bullying and harassment in schools. So there's definitely a need for CAIR to increase its services across the country. And as I mentioned earlier, when I reviewed the mission statement, we're approaching the current civil rights issues facing our communities in many different ways. Civil rights advocacy is a big component of our work, but we also engage with the media. It's a big part of our work. The photo that you see on the slide is actually a photo of all of our CAIR representatives across the country that are spokespeople for the Muslim community and for CAIR. And mashallah, we do a lot of trainings on the grassroots level in terms of media training and advocacy. We do civic engagement, countering Islamophobia, and really some proactive initiatives and efforts to counter Islamophobia. So with that, I will turn it over to our next presenter, Veronica, Laizure, to talk about an introduction to civil rights.
Thank you so much, Lori. I want to briefly cover what civil rights are and what is discrimination, so that you'll have some idea of where we're going with this presentation. So what civil rights are specifically are your rights to be treated just the same as anyone else and to be free from persecution by the government or from social organizations and even from discrimination by private individuals. You have the right to be free from discrimination on the basis of your existence in what we call protected classes, basically on the basis of your race, religion, color, national origin, gender, sexual orientation or gender identity, disability, or age. And different states define these classes differently, and federal law defines it itself. But the core component of civil rights is that no matter what your belonging is to any of these particular groups, you still have the rights to be treated the same as anyone else who does not belong to members of your particular protected group. There are three major sources of civil rights here in the United States. The first one is the Constitution of the United States, and particularly the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. We work a lot with First Amendment rights, the rights to freedom of speech and religion, the right to the press, the right to assemble, the right to petition the government. Those are all rights that are granted in the First Amendment, and the Constitution and the First Amendment say that the government cannot infringe upon those rights or prevent you from exercising them. You also have the right under the Fourth Amendment to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, so the police can't come into your house without probable cause and go through your belongings. And if they do, you have redress for those kinds of violations. The second major source of civil rights in the United States is federal and state law. An example of a federal law that affects your civil rights might be the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In particular, we work a lot with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and protect equal employment opportunities for American Muslims and also for the rest of the community. That means that you have the right under federal law to be free from discrimination in the context of your job, whether it's hiring, firing, getting workplace accommodations, or being promoted. And then the third major source of civil rights in the United States is judicial precedent, or court decisions that become binding on lower courts and that affect how your civil rights play out on a day-to-day basis. So I will turn it over to our next presenter to discuss what your civil rights are at the airport and at the border of the United States, and kind of what you can expect in those spaces with regard to protecting your civil rights.
So our next speaker will be Lena Masri, our National Litigation Director, and she will give an introduction to airport security.
Assalamu alaikum. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction now before we dive into the details of what your rights are at the border and at the airport. But at the airport, you're generally, or at the U.S. ports of entry, you're generally going to run across two different types of agents, federal agents. The first is U.S. Customs and Border Protection, known as CBP. CBP is charged with regulating and facilitating international trade, collecting import duties, enforcing U.S. regulations, but most importantly, immigration. So you'll generally see them at U.S. ports of entry. TSA are the agents that you generally see at the airports that are manning the checkpoints, conducting what we call primary and secondary inspections. Primary inspections, the purpose is a more general screening, and this is what's done for general passengers that are awaiting to board their flights. And many of you have seen this, where you're asked to remove your shoes, put your belongings on a belt for them to run through an x-ray, and passengers are also asked to go through x-rays or body scans. Some individuals are asked to, are pulled aside to go through what's known as secondary screening. Secondary screening can be something that is a random selection. There is a alarm that goes off for a random selection. Somebody could be pulled aside for a particular reason because a TSA agent suspects that this individual should probably be pulled aside for additional screening for whatever reason. It could also be because of profiling, unfortunately, or it could be because that person is on the watch list, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But generally, secondary inspections involve additional screening, pat-downs, chemical testing, and additional questioning. Questioning could be done by FBI agents. It could also be done by TSA agents at the checkpoint. Now, with respect to the body scanners, you do have the right to opt out of the body scanner. But if you do opt out, you would be asked to go through the x-ray. You can also request an enhanced pat-down. For Muslim women, you have the right to ask for a pat-down by a female inspector. Now, with respect to the chemical testing, and I briefly mentioned this a little bit before, generally, if you come up as a random selection or for a secondary inspection where they want to conduct additional screening, they do have the right to conduct what's called an explosive trace detection swabbing. And what that generally entails is they take a piece of cloth and swab it on your hands or your clothing. For Muslim women, we often see this being done on the headscarf, or your luggage or electronics or any personal items that you have on you. They can swab that and test it and come back with a result of positive or negative for any trace elements of chemicals. And I'll leave it the next section for the next presenter.
Okay, and next we'll have Hassan Shibly talk about rights at TSA checkpoints and rights at CBP in the border. Okay, so Hassan, whenever you're ready, we'll go ahead and get into your rights at the airport.
Oh, I apologize. I was muted. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for that. I was just forgetting myself. Jazakallah khairan, Sister Lena, for that introduction and the amazing work you're doing. Sister Lena actually sues the federal government and does an amazing job doing that when they violate the rights that are enshrined. And Sister Lori is also doing an amazing job expanding our ability to do that by growing CAIR nationwide, thanks to the support of many people like yourselves. Alhamdulillah, you know, we have tremendous rights as we travel, but these rights are only meaningful if you know them and understand them. So I'm going to focus really talking about the most relevant to our rights and things to be aware of as we're leaving the country and as we're returning. Now in Hajj, the most difficult part of Hajj in our time really is about waiting and having patience. And that's often the difficulties that we encounter as we travel as related to waiting. And you see that as you get to the TSA line. So it's true, TSA can detain you very briefly if they feel that you're a security risk. They can ask you to do a pat-down even if you go through the scanner. So what happens is you're going to get in line. Some people maybe pre-check. If you're pre-check, it's a lot faster of a process because if you're pre-check, you often although they still can ask you to, but they often don't make you take off your shoes. You don't have to take out your laptop. And my advice for everybody is apply for TSA pre-check if you haven't already, or even a step beyond, you may want to apply for global entry, which often expedites the entry and exit process. But for most people, when you're going to get in the TSA line, you're going to have to take out the liquids, you're going to have to take out your laptop, take off your shoes, you're going to walk through the scanner. They may still ask you for a pat down. You also have the right to request a pat down instead of going through the scanner. So keep that in mind. And if you ask for a pat down, you have the right to have the pat down conducted in private. And of course, the pat down must be conducted by a member of the same gender, and you have the right to make sure that that actually happens. They may ask you to go, they may go through your carry-ons, they may search it, and they generally may ask you about where you're going, and very brief questions. Usually that's just to your demeanor and nothing to be concerned with. But TSA generally, when it comes to leaving the country, is not a major issue. They cannot ask you personal religious questions, nor should they. If they do, feel free to ask for the agent's name and note that, and you can file a complaint with CAIR afterwards. They shouldn't be targeting you for more screening based on your race or religion. However, when it comes to the hijab, for example, sometimes they may ask to pat down the hijab. That's something that happens. Just be aware of it. And when I go through TSA scanner with my kufi, they may ask me to remove the kufi. They can't really do extensive searches without a probable cause. And they definitely cannot ask you to remove the hijab in public. So keep that in mind. If for whatever reason it goes off and they need to conduct a more thorough search of the hijab, you certainly have the right to ask that be done by a member of the same gender and in private. So with that, we'll jump into the next slide. If we can move into the next slide, please, inshallah. Now, typically, when you're going for Hajj, you can go through TSA. And then after TSA, you actually, even as you're leaving the country, you may run into customs. And customs may be doing a check before you leave. Now, typically, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be asking how much currency you have, and if you have more than $10,000 or more in currency. This is very important. We've had a number of clients that have got help in the situation where maybe the wife is carrying 6,000 and the husband is carrying 5,000. Well, that equals 11,000. That's more than the $10,000 amount. Now, you're allowed to take as much money as you want out of the country. That's not an issue, but you do have to declare it to customs if it's $10,000 or more. And a husband and wife traveling together, or a party traveling together, and if they each have 6,000, well, that equals 12,000. That's an amount that you have to declare. So be sure you declare it. Otherwise, they can confiscate it. And then it takes a really long time to get it back, and they take a penalty on top of that. And the currency can include, various forms of money, not just dollars, and things that are considered currency or currency equivalents. So just keep that in mind when leaving the country. Now, the major issue really, and the major time you interact with customs is upon your return into the country. The first thing that I want everybody to understand is it's really nothing to sweat, nothing to be nervous about. I find that a lot of times our community members get really scared and nervous about traveling, or nervous about interacting with customs on the way back. You remember this: if you're a U.S. citizen, they absolutely have to let you in the country. They cannot deny you entry into the country. Now, there have been some rare cases where U.S. citizens have been able to fly home for whatever reason, but in those cases, they contacted CAIR and we were able to take care of it. But for the overwhelming majority of people, look, if you're a U.S. citizen, they have to let you in the country. If you're a green card holder, they can't take away your green card unless you've been out of the country for, and abandoned the green card because you've been out over a year, or depending on the situation. You really don't have anything to worry about in terms of entry. As long as you haven't broken the law while you're overseas, you're not breaking the law as you're coming back, you're not coming back with contraband, or you're not failing to declare, they have to let you in the country, whether you're a U.S. citizen, and even as a green card holder, they're going to let you in. So don't be nervous. At most, they may detain you for a couple extra hours because you've been so-called randomly selected, and Lena will talk more about that process later. But at most, you may be held for a little bit. Now, understand that U.S. Customs, they can, pick you for secondary inspection, and they can ask you questions. Where did you go? Where are you going? What do you do in the U.S.? Now, generally the advice that I give to myself, my friends, is that answer basic questions. Where did you go? Where are you going? What do you do? Very basic questions, but understand that you're under no obligation to answer invasive questions about your religious beliefs, your political opinions, contact information for family members, anything that you feel is too personal and that's not really relevant to where you came from, where you're going. You really don't have to answer. They can ask whatever they want, arguably, but you don't have to answer. And if they're asking inappropriate questions, at that point, you can just reaffirm, say, look, I'm a U.S. citizen, here's my ID, or look, I'm a valid green card holder, here's my ID, and I would like to speak to the supervisor. And you can inform the supervisor that the officer is asking you inappropriate questions about your religious beliefs or other things that you feel inappropriate. And make note of that. And then once you get out, try to get officers' names, of course, and everybody you've been interacting with. And once you get out, contact CAIR and file a complaint. But otherwise, again, as a U.S. citizen, they must let you in. Even a green card holder, as long as you haven't abandoned the green card, they're going to have to let you in. At most, they may detain you for a couple hours, but and you can answer whatever questions you're comfortable asking that you feel is relevant. But I would highly recommend that people avoid answering personal, religious, or political questions, and understand that you're really, besides identifying yourself, you're under no obligation to answer any questions aside from making any required declaration. So again, if you're coming in with more than $10,000 or more of currency, you have to declare that. If you're coming in with fruits and vegetables like dates, you may have to declare that. So just be aware of that. They may also be able to confiscate your electronics. Now, what U.S. Customs has been doing is they've been asking travelers, predominantly Muslims, unfortunately, they've been asking them to search their cell phone, to asking them about their social media. And what do you do in that circumstance? Well, understand this. If they request to inspect your cell phone, your laptop, your electronics, you actually must provide that for them. They have the right to physically inspect anything you're bringing in the country. So you have to provide that. Now, they may ask you to unlock your cell phone or unlock your computer or provide them the password. The reality is you do not have to provide them the password and you do not have to unlock it. You have to physically provide it, but you do not have to provide them the password and you do not have to unlock it. However, they may, if they have, can make a claim that they have reasonable suspicion of illegal activity on that device, they may confiscate that and they can take it for a few weeks as they try to search it. However, they can confiscate it whether you give them the password or not. And I've had cases where people have given the password to their phone and given the password to the laptop, and U.S. Customs has still taken it. And then I just spoke to a gentleman yesterday who said, yes, U.S. Customs asked for my cell phone. I gave them my cell phone, but I didn't give them the password, so they just gave me the cell phone back. So yes, they can confiscate it, but they can confiscate it regardless of whether or not you give them the password or not, and regardless of whether or not you unlock it. So the gist of it is you have to identify yourself at U.S. Customs. You have to make any required declarations, such as if you're bringing fruits or vegetables or you're bringing $10,000 or more in currency. You have to provide the electronics that they may request of you, but you do not have to answer any personal or religious questions, and you don't have to provide the password to U.S. Customs or unlock it. Now, if you feel that you're being discriminated against, or you are held at secondary, or you feel like you're being asked inappropriate questions, make sure you contact CAIR when you leave. Or it may not be a bad idea to have a family member who knows your itinerary, and if they haven't heard from you within an hour or two, then they can contact the local CAIR office with your travel information to follow up. So that's the gist. If you're a U.S. citizen, they have to let you in. They may hold you for a few hours, and you just come back from Hajj. That's ibadah, so just do some extra dhikr, some Quran. I wouldn't answer personal religious questions. I wouldn't answer political questions. And I wouldn't be scared, and I wouldn't be nervous. And just, be patient and go through the process. And if you feel like you've been mistreated, just contact CAIR. And that's the gist of dealing with U.S. Customs. And if there's any questions, we can answer them at the end, inshallah.
Thank you, Hassan. That was really helpful. And I also want to remind everybody that in the event that your cell phone or your laptop or other electronic device is actually confiscated, make sure you contact your local CAIR office And if there is no CAIR office in your state, then call our national office, and that's something that we would gladly help you with. There's been many instances where CAIR attorneys have been able to recover those phones, although you know, chances are the government is not able to access the information on those phones if you don't provide the password, and we're still able to recover them anyways. So do contact us if that issue comes up. But moving on to the next issue, the terrorist screening database. What is it, and how do you know if you're on it? First, the terrorist screening database is essentially a master list or repository that's administered by the FBI's subdivision, which is known as the Terrorist Screening Center, the TSC. And the watch list has two primary components. There's the selectee list and there's the no-fly list. The no-fly list is the easiest to know if you're on it. You essentially are unable to board a flight. The U.S. government will not allow you to fly over U.S. airspace, board a flight. So unfortunately, the way that people find out that they are on the no-fly list is after they arrive at the airport and they're denied boarding. They're usually not given information at the time besides the fact that they are on the no-fly list, and they're directed to go through the DHS trip process, where we will talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, in order to challenge their designation on the no-fly list. You do not receive any advance notice that you're on the no-fly list. The selectee list, on the other hand, one of the ways that you can find out that you're on it is if you get 4 S's on your boarding pass. Now, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the common theme between both the no-fly list and the selectee list is that everybody that's on the watch list, whether you're on the no-fly list or the selectee list, you've essentially been designated by the U.S. government as a known or suspected terrorist. Unfortunately, we know that since 2009, there's been over 1.5 million nominations to the watch list. And all it takes is a nomination by a single agent, and it's essentially rubber stamped. 98.96% of all nominations actually end up as being a part of the watch list. There are limited administrative remedies to challenge your designation and get your name off. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So what is the selectee list? It is a selection for secondary screening. Individuals that receive the 4 S's on their boarding pass typically can't check in online for their flight. They can't check in at a kiosk at the airport. They're directed by the kiosk to speak with an airline representative at the counter. And the counter, the airline representative is not able to print a boarding pass for you. Instead, the airline representative is required to contact the Department of Homeland Security and get clearance to allow you to board. That process can take a long time. It can take anywhere between 25 minutes to hours before that clearance is given by Department of Homeland Security. A boarding pass is printed with 4 S's on it, and oftentimes these individuals are subjected to extensive screening, additional to other passengers, pat-downs, chemical testing, interrogations by FBI agents. A lot of times, FBI agents, I hate to say the word greet, but essentially greet them upon landing. And the way they do that is they'll stand at the gate, and as people are deplaning, they will check everybody's IDs until you appear, and then they will take you aside, go through every piece of personal item in your luggage, interrogate you for hours, and so on. This is what is known as the selectee list. Now, besides the consequences at the airport, which I talked about, and actually before I move on, people that are on the selectee list, as I said earlier, this is one way to find out that you're on the selectee list. The no-fly list, you have to attempt to board to find out that you're on the no-fly list. If you don't try to fly, you may still be on these lists, and it can impact your life in different ways, although you didn't find out directly by trying to travel. So people that are on the watch list oftentimes have, you know, a web of consequences are imposed upon them in their daily lives, such as, you know, there could be random bank account closures without notice. A lot of individuals that have had their bank accounts closed are also on the watch list. People that are subjected to lengthy immigration delays if they apply for their citizenship or for their green card. Their applications get put on indefinite hold. They're not able to do wire transfers or even in some instances rent vehicles at a car dealership or test drive vehicles. It could be the basis of a traffic stop. So although it may start at the airport, there are consequences that are outside that can also help you recognize that you may be on the watch list. If anything that I said leads you to believe that you may be on the watch list, then, you know, please contact your local CAIR office and we will file what we need to file to get you off of that list. We'll talk about the DHS trip process, which is the administrative remedy that's available to you a little bit later on in the presentation if you are on the watch list. And I'll leave it to the next presenter.
So our next presenter will be Veronica, and she will talk about what you should know when traveling, give you some information on airport prayer rooms, packing, and other information.
Thank you, Hassan and Lena, for your incredibly detailed and informative explanation of what to expect and what your rights are at the border. And with regard to the selectee list, I'm going to cover some other information about what you should know when you're traveling and just some general information that might help you as you're preparing for Hajj and as you're going through the airport. If you encounter any problems during your travel through the airport, there's the most important things that you should remember. The first thing is to go ahead and to assert your rights, to let people know that you have the right, for example, to be patted down by an officer of your same gender. You have the right not to have to remove your hijab in public. And sometimes agents simply are not aware that that's a right that's protected. And so you being able to assert that fact can often help you get what the treatment that you deserve. You have the right to ask why you're being subjected to questions about your personal life and beliefs. Like, for example, as Hassan discussed, if you're going through the border and people are asking very specific questions about what you've done while you're traveling, you can ask why you're being subjected to that kind of questioning and just really question whether that's appropriate at that point. You can always ask to speak to someone's supervisor. At this point, it's always a good idea if you encounter any problems while traveling, always to document the name and the agency and the badge number of the agent or person who is who's giving you the problem. And that's just good practice in any situation, because that allows whoever you report to kind of follow up on that and to figure out where things went wrong and what could be done better next time. So be sure, if possible, to ask for the name and badge number and the agency of the person who is giving you the problem or who is discriminating against you, so that you can follow up with that later. That's also a good practice when you're escalating, when you are asking to speak to a supervisor to get your questions answered. Also, get their name and their agency and their badge number as well, and keep that information secure so you can follow up later. At any time, if you feel like you've been the victim of discrimination, you can make complaints to the relevant agencies, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Or we've covered that sort of in the DHS trips information. And then, of course, that's why CAIR exists. We exist to help people who are experiencing difficulties when they're in a variety of situations, including when you're traveling from Hajj or when you're crossing the border. So if something has happened to you at the airport and you believe you've been a victim of discrimination, or you just want to know what your next steps are, go ahead and contact your local CAIR chapter and speak to someone there, and they'll give you some idea of where you need to go. Things that you should know about airport prayer rooms. Most airports, especially the larger airports, will have a chapel or a meditation room or some sort of multi-faith prayer room that you can use to perform your prayers. If you can't see signs for it, consult airport information desks. They should know where these are located. And if for some reason your airport does not have a designated prayer area, please contact your local CAIR chapter, because we might be able to help you get a prayer room installed at your airport if you're traveling there a lot. Some tips on packing for travel. These are just general guidelines for any time that you're traveling, but especially when you're going for Hajj. The following should probably not be packed in your check bags and should be carried with you in your carry-on. Expensive jewelry and cash so that you can keep that secure. Laptops, computers, although there are issues with that Hassan discussed. Other electronics. Wrapped gifts so that you can keep them protected. Fragile items because they might be subjected to some rough handling as they go through the airport. Film, because film can be damaged by the screening equipment. And of course, and loose lithium batteries. It's always a good idea to try not to pack your things so tightly that they will cause like a dense mass on the scanner, because that will cause your luggage often to be opened up and searched. It's always a good idea to have ID tags on the inside and the outside of your luggage in case things get mixed up at baggage claim and you need help identifying and finding your luggage. And if you do plan to lock your baggage, use TSA approved locks, because those will be removed, and that way you don't want them to have to ruin a perfectly good lock and cost you that money. When it comes to packing, especially for something like Hajj, when in doubt, it's best to leave it out. Let's see. And then on returning from Hajj, I think that's another presenter.
Yeah, so now Hassan will speak about returning from Hajj, and then Lena will discuss DHS trip process.
Bismillah. Just on that note too, when you're packing, alhamdulillah, I've done to Hajj and I'm going this year. I only typically take a carry-on, and if you can keep your, the less luggage, the better. A lot of times, just a helpful tip, people can buy, you could buy clothes over there. And you could even buy a bigger, check-in luggage that you can check in on the way back with gifts. So travel light. You'll thank me because you're going to be going to Mecca, Medina, Mina, Arafah, and the less you have to carry, the better. Another point, real quick, when you're traveling and you're in the airplane, remember Hajj is farad, so is our salah. You don't want to miss salah on the plane, so make sure you're doing your salah as you fly. Now, a lot of the airlines, and frankly, most of the American and European airlines have absolutely no problem when you're in stable flight, when you're cruising, you speak to the flight attendants and they will actually allow you to perform the prayer while standing by the emergency exits and by the galley, out of people's way, but they, just while standing. So I definitely encourage people to perform their salah properly while standing in cruise altitude if that allows them. Sometimes the Arab airlines give you a more difficult time for that. So obviously if they don't let you, then you can perform it sitting, but if they're not going to let you do it while standing. But the airlines will let you do it standing. I've never had a problem with an American airline do that. So just, you can feel free to ask them. In terms of Zamzam, so the presentation says keep Zamzam in checked luggage, but actually now the way it's happening is you actually can buy boxed Zamzam right at the airport. So at the airport in Jeddah, when you're leaving, they typically, and you can double check this with your own Hajj tour company, but they will typically be selling the Zamzam that's already sealed and packaged. And what the airlines will typically allow you to do is, in addition to your checked luggage, they will allow you to check that in as well. So you'll actually just buy the box. It'll be a box that has a bag. The bag has a bottle inside, a big bottle of Zamzam water. And you can just buy that right there and check it in at the airport in Jeddah to New York. Now, however, once you get to the US, if you don't have a ticket, if you cannot check it into your final destination, and you have to recheck it in on an American airline, just note that that box will count as a luggage, check-in luggage. And it depends on your type of ticket if you have to pay for that and how much. So just keep that in mind. For the dates, you definitely want to make sure they're dried or shrink wrapped or sealed. And to be on the safe side, you want to declare them when coming back. But typically, people haven't had problems with dates as long as, again, just make sure you declare it and clean off any soil. And just don't forget, again, if you're coming in and out of the country, to declare if you have $10,000 or more in currency. And really, one thing I forgot to say earlier, but the worst thing you can do is lie to a federal officer. So under no circumstance say anything that's untruthful. because that's a federal offense. And that's often what they use to recruit informants in the community. People make a mistake in what they communicate and say, oh, you lied to us, now you got to spy for us on the mosques, or we're going to throw you in jail. So don't lie. And remember, besides declaring, you really, again, under very little obligation to communicate to the federal officers when you return. So make dua for us, inshallah. And that's what I have on returning from Hajj.
Okay, so continuing on the watch list discussion, we talked about people that are on the no-fly list, that when they attempt to board a flight, they're prevented from boarding. People that are on the selectee list who have the 4 S's on their boarding pass. Another group of people that are watch listed are the people that consistently, every single time they cross through land ports of entry, like the U.S.-Canada border, if every time they cross back into the United States, when they have their passport swiped, alarm goes off, they're surrounded by armed agents, taken to the back to a cell or to a room and questioned for hours by customs officers or FBI agents. If this is a repeated phenomenon that's happening every time you cross back into the United States, you're likely on the watch list as well. Or if you have any of the other issues that I identified earlier, if you've had a citizenship application that's been pending for 10 years, let's say, and it should have been processed within 6 months to a year, then you're likely on the watch list, which means if you try to travel to Hajj, you're probably on the selectee list or the no-fly list, one of the two. And you probably will have difficulty traveling. If you had a random bank account closure or you know, any of the items that I mentioned before, then you should consult with a CAIR chapter, because you're likely going to have travel issues when trying to go to Hajj. Now, if you have been experiencing travel difficulties, the only process that the government has given us to remove our name, to challenge our designation on a watch list, is to file what's called DHS TRIP, or Department of Homeland Security Traveler Redress Inquiry Program. It's essentially a 4-page form, and you provide your, simple identifying information, your passport information, driver's license, and submit it to Department of Homeland Security. They conduct a secret background review process of the reasons why you were added to the list. You are not involved in that process. You will never know the reasons why you were added on the watch list, because it's an issue of national security. So they're not going to share that information with you or provide you with evidence of the reasons why you've been added to the watch list. But once this background process is completed, you will get a form letter back. If you are on the no-fly list, as a result of litigation as of April of 2015, the federal government is now required to respond to you in writing and inform you that you are on the no-fly list. If you are on the no-fly list, the only process that you have available to you to remove your name from the no-fly list is to file a lawsuit. And this is something that we have filed all over the country. So please contact your local chapter if that is your situation. If you are on the selectee list, or if you are any of the other categories that I talked about, you're going to get a general letter back. And this DHS process can take a couple of months. It could take a year in some instances. But on average, it takes about 3 to 4 months to get a response. And your response will say, essentially along the lines, we can neither confirm nor deny whether or not you're on a watch list, but if you are on a watch list and you were added by mistake, then rest assured we took measures to fix it. That's essentially what it says. It doesn't really say much, and the only way that you can confirm whether it worked, whether you successfully were able to remove your name from the watch list, is by trying to travel again and seeing if you continue to have the same problems that you were having before. Now, although the DHS trip process is a very simple form that you can fill out on your own, we highly recommend that you do not fill it out on your own and that you file it with the assistance of one of the CAIR chapters or an attorney. And the reason is because generally the FBI will use the DHS trip process as an opportunity to question people that file it. They may come to your home and tell you, you know, we know that you have travel difficulties, and use that as a basis to interrogate you for hours. And obviously, if that happens, we recommend that you do not talk with the FBI without the presence of an attorney. The DHS trip process, from our experience, has worked for some individuals. For other individuals, it does not work. If it does not work for you, then your only recourse is to file a lawsuit to remove your name from the watch list. Now, for the cases of people that have not flown before, but have experienced any of the difficulties that I talked about, such as a citizenship application that's been sitting forever, or a green card or a marriage petition that just is not being processed, and they told you that it's an FBI name check. In those situations, we still recommend that you file a DHS trip, although it may not be in connection with a travel difficulty that you had. We can pretty much presume that you are going to experience travel difficulties. So contact us if that is your situation as well. Now, a couple of tips for people that are on the watch list that are going to be traveling. We actually recommend that when you cross the checkpoint, if you are on the watch list, on the selectee list, and you frequently experience extensive secondary screening, to actually cross light at the checkpoint and check as much as possible into your checked baggage. The less that you have on you, the less they're able to inspect. If you're wearing very light clothing, if you, you know, we even recommend that you can even check in your phone if that's something that you're willing to do. They cannot search a device that you don't have on you. If you have frequently experienced them seizing your phone, confiscating your phone, and searching it repeatedly at the border, in that instance, we would recommend that you actually take a loaner phone because you're not losing important information that you have on your phone because you're crossing again. Now, I do want to highlight that under the Trump administration, we have seen an increase in people being added onto the watch list. And we have seen an increase in people that are being added to the no-fly list after exiting the United States, and as a result, they're being stranded abroad because they're unable to board a flight back to the United States. These types of cases are considered emergency high-priority cases for us. So if that does happen to you, please contact us as well. And that's it from my end. I'll leave it to the next presenter.
Okay, great. So that is the end of our presentation, but now we will open it up to questions. So if you are on the webinar, there is a questions tab, and there is also a chat function. So please feel free to ask questions, and I see that there are already several questions that you are asking. So we'll just jump into it. We'll go ahead and start taking questions, and inshallah, we will try to finish in about the next 15 minutes. Okay, so the first question is, can I be forced to unlock my phone for them? So for likely CBP. So maybe Hassan.
I mean, I would say, yeah, I would say they really cannot force you to unlock the phone. They could potentially use your fingerprint, and that would generate an interesting legal case. But even with those phones, as long as if you restart, like my iPhone, if I restart it, then even the fingerprint won't unlock it. You'll have to enter the password. And there's no way they could compel you, absent some sort of court order, to provide the password or enter the password. They'll threaten to take away the phone. They'll threaten to confiscate the phone. But the truth is, they can do that even if you unlock it. So I don't believe that they can force you to unlock the phone, no.
And just to add to that, we recently had a client that I represented out of Vermont, and he was actually forced down by 5 CBP officers at the U.S.-Canada border. And he was, they forcibly took his phone from him, which they should not do. He refused to provide his password, and they confiscated his phone. The FBI was unable to open his phone. They contacted, he contacted me, and I got in touch with the FBI agent right away. And when the FBI agent admitted that he didn't have a warrant or a right to unlock the phone or to get the password, he just turned around and dropped the phone back off within half an hour of contacting him. So, just keep in mind that they may get aggressive, they may confiscate your phone just because you refuse to give them your password. But in the end, you do not know what it is they're looking for, and how they will interpret the information that they see. So it is in your interest not to provide that information.
Okay, great.
And this is very important to keep in mind also. If you're a doctor, I apologize, just real quick. If you're a doctor or a lawyer, you have people's confidential communications and information in your phone that you really may be violating serious ethical and legal rules and in giving that information over to the government. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you. The next question is around laptops and Hajj travel. Does the laptop ban apply to Saudi Arabia? So whoever wants to take that one.
So as far, Lena, you can correct me. So as far as airlines still prohibiting laptops on foreign airlines, so they will still, on foreign airlines, may still prohibit you from returning to the U.S. with a laptop on your possession or anything larger than a smartphone. I'm not sure, and Lena, we may have to double check or we may have to research and see what the current situation is, if that's still going on or if they're amending it. But as of now, foreign airlines flying to the U.S., they may not be allowing those on the phone. What they'll typically do, like on Turkish Airlines, which is what a lot of people may be flying on, they will actually, before you board the plane, you keep the laptop with you. You don't check it into your luggage, but once you get to the gate and before you board the plane, you can check in your laptop with the agent. They'll give you a receipt, and then once you land, where you collect your luggage, there's a special desk where they have where they'll give you the laptop back, and they did a pretty good job of individually wrapping each laptop and safely transporting it.
So the airlines that are coming from Saudi Arabia are now exempted from the laptop ban recently. So I don't believe that is a concern now.
Okay, the next question is, can you please expand on the next steps if your profile contains the 4 S's and how this can be remedied? So I know, Lena, you talked about this, so maybe a review of what people can do if they have the 4 S's on their boarding pass.
Yes, so the very first step I would recommend would be to contact your local office, because we would be able to walk you through what the steps are. I would encourage you not to file the DHS trip process on your own, but that is actually the only remedy that's been given to you by the U.S. government to challenge your designation, is filing that form and waiting for that form letter to come back from the government after having reviewed your status. And it may work, it may not work. If it does not work, and that DHS trip form would be a form that you can file through our office with DHS. And once it comes back, if you're still having travel difficulties, the next step would be to file a lawsuit in court and challenge your designation in front of a judge. Now, it's important to know that the selectee list is probably one of the most difficult types of cases to challenge in court. but it is essentially the step that you would have to take to challenge it, and that's essentially it. So please contact us if that is the situation that you're in.
Okay, great. And I just want to remind people, if you have a specific case that you need assistance with, we're unable to provide legal advice through this webinar, but if you need legal help, please contact your local office, contact CAIR National, and we'll give you that information, the contact information at the end, and we'll be able to answer that. So the next question is, if you are an imam and are asked about your job title, how do you answer that without interfering with your religious background? So maybe Hassan, if you want to take that one.
Sure. It really depends on how comfortable you are. So you could say you're a clergy. You could straight up say you're an imam, but just understand that may open up the doors for them to start trying to ask more questions. And at some point, you're going to have to draw the line. We've documented cases this year where they ask, are you devout Muslim? How many times a day do you pray? What mosque you go to? What does your imam preach? They have asked these inappropriate questions, which people should not answer and are under no obligation to answer. But if you're an imam, you could just, say I'm, the clergy or religious leader or an imam at such and such a mosque. And I think it's fine to give that much information. But the minute they start going into more, I would just say, look, I don't feel comfortable asking any further questions. I'm an American citizen, it's my ID. Let me know when you guys will let me through, and that's it. I don't know, Lena, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, keep something in mind. If you're an imam, and we see this all the time, as imams are asked a lot of questions about their religious beliefs and practices, and questions that are designed to essentially determine how religious you are, your level of religiosity. And the reason that they ask you these questions is because you are influencing a whole constituency, congregants that are following you and seeking advice and counsel from you. And so imams do tend to be pulled aside pretty frequently and subjected to religious questioning. And the information that is received from those questions normally results in members of your congregation getting interviewed by FBI and follow up to the responses that you gave. So when you're answering questions, you're not only answering about yourself, but you're also answering for your constituents as well. And that's the reason they're targeting you. So it's important for you to only answer the routine type questions, as what is your profession and where do you work? I am an imam and I work at such and such mosque. You may look that up to confirm that that's true. And anything beyond that, what your ideology is, what books you read to learn about Islam, things like that are considered questions that you just do not have to answer and inappropriate.
Okay, thank you, Lena. The next question is, he's saying, my first name is Muhammad and I always get pulled for extended screening. I'm also going for Hajj this year. Is there any way to avoid extended screening?
My question to you would be whether you've had any difficulty checking in online or at a kiosk. Unfortunately, a lot of Muslims with common names are added to the watch list. And, the watch list really is a list of Muslims, to be quite blunt. Almost every instance of individuals that are publicly known that are on the watch list are either Muslim or perceived to be Muslim. And this could be a reason, is if you are repeatedly subjected to screening, then it may have started with your name being Muhammad, but you may have actually ended up on the watch list. In that type of situation, DHS trip would still be the remedy for you. Even though we don't know for sure whether you're on the watch list, we'd have to do a more extensive travel history with you to determine if you are or not. But even if you're not on the watch list, DHS trip is still the only remedy that's been given to you to address that travel difficulty. On the other hand, we can also file a complaint for you. if it happens at the airports by TSA, or if it happens at the border by CBP, we can file complaints for you with those respective agencies to try to address the issue that way as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this is a company that provides translation receivers for those going on Hajj that don't speak Arabic, and the device requires batteries. Should we encourage people to purchase batteries in Saudi Arabia, or is it okay for them to pack the batteries in their carry-on luggage?
Okay, you can definitely take regular batteries, especially for that device. Actually, it's a good reminder to mention that for a lot of people, if you're going for Hajj and you don't understand Arabic, you might want to check out the Divine Connect. They have a translation service that they do in partnership with the two holy mosques, so they actually translate the Friday services. You can Google it, Divine Connect. But yeah, batteries, I mean, if you take the Divine Connect device, you have batteries, you could definitely keep that in your carry-on. There shouldn't be any issue with that. At most, you know, like any electronic, they may plot and search, but there's nothing in that they can really give you a hard time with it. I think they use regular batteries.
Okay, and the next question, so if a spouse is being questioned alone, what can the other spouse do? So the specific question is, how can I ensure that my wife is not being harassed while being questioned?
If they are questioning your spouse, they have the right to do that. So customs officers have plenary power, which means they have wide latitude to do what they need to do to protect the borders. And if that entails extensive questioning of somebody privately in a room without any interference from someone else, then they have the right to do that. So there's really not much that you can do in that situation. But if the questioning is taking a long period of time, more than an hour, 2 hours, then we recommend that you take steps to contact an attorney, because your spouse may be in a position where they can't contact an attorney, but you can. So we'd recommend that you contact one of our offices, contact an attorney, and try to secure counsel to help get involved if the situation escalates. I don't know, Hassan, do you want to add to that?
No, I agree. And just the main thing is both spouses should know their rights. And again, they may hold you, but especially if they put you in any situation you're not comfortable with and you're U.S. citizens and they separate you from your spouse, just tell them straight up, you know what, the one who is separated, the one who's taken for questioning, say straight up, you know what, I don't feel comfortable answering any questions without my spouse here. Or I don't, you know, I'm an American citizen, this is my ID, and there's no need for me to answer any questions, and I'd like your ID. Again, they can't force you to answer, so you have the upper hand and you got nothing to be scared. At most, it'll just be a couple hours of waiting, which you can do dhikr in, and then you can come out and file a complaint, as Lena described.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this is a quick question. How early should we go to the airport in order to make sure we get our flights if there is a potential for a security issue? So if they're expecting a security delay, what do you recommend in terms of how much time they need to get through the security?
Typically, from what we hear from people that are on the selectee list or are repeatedly subjected to secondary screening, you know, unfortunately, it's hard to predict, but typically the clearance process itself, we usually hear that it takes max about an hour and a half, 2 hours in a bad situation. This unfortunately has caused problems with connections coming back from international travel, and if there is a connection that's domestic, if it's a short connection, it may put you in a situation where you might miss that connection, because once you land, you also have to get clearance in order to board the next flight. So there is that possibility, so keep that in mind. If it's possible to keep your connections longer, that's advisable. But if you come about 2 hours, 2.5 hours in advance of your flight, I think that's plenty. But you know, you can't guarantee anything. If they decide to take you aside for questioning by the FBI, or you know, searching every piece of you know, personal item in your luggage, it could take longer. We've heard of instances where it's taken longer than that. But I think for the most part that's a pretty good time frame. Hassan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The issue is if the airlines to call the DHS number to clear to print your boarding pass, that can take, I mean, sometimes it takes 5-10 minutes. It could take up to 45 minutes, an hour. So if you have a difficult time traveling or you've had issues, then I would add an hour, hour and a half to the regular time to be safe. So personally, on an international flight, you want to get to the airport about 2 hours before, but if you have trouble traveling, then you may want to be there 3 hours before. A lot of times the ticket counter anyway will not open before 3 hours. So 3 hours is just when it opens for international flights, and you should be there right at the beginning if you're expecting issues.
So I know we answered this earlier. Just to clarify again, I'm seeing more questions around laptops. So are we allowed to carry laptops on the plane?
Yes, you are. Simple as a simple answer.
Okay. And then the next question is, Hassan, maybe you can answer this. You spoke to this earlier. Do you recommend buying a simple phone to use just for Hajj?
Great question. So for Hajj, first of all, if you have T-Mobile, the best people who have service in Hajj are those who have T-Mobile for whatever reason, including data. It has free data over there, so just keep that in mind. Secondly, data plans are cheap, so even a simple phone, I would take a smartphone. You're going to want to keep in touch with, you should be focusing on your ibadah. Of course, you can have your Quran and everything in your smartphone, but you're going to want to keep in touch with family and friends, and data is relatively cheap now. So you're going to want a smartphone with you while you're there. But for example, if you have an iPhone, it doesn't hurt to buy an older or cheaper iPhone that you can take with you while you travel. And then before you get to the airport, you could simply make sure the phone is backed up, and then just clear out all the data. And then once you land and you're there, you can log in and re-download whatever data you need while you're over there. You can always clear out the phone. So yeah, if you expect U.S. Customs to ask for your phone, or you just want to avoid that whole confrontation, it definitely doesn't hurt to have a traveling phone that you take with you. That's not necessarily a bad idea.
Okay, and then another question about email passwords. If TSA asks for email passwords and wants to unlock cell phones, what is a good response?
I haven't heard of cases of TSA. Go ahead, Lena.
Go ahead and answer that one.
No, after you, Lena, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to go along with what Hassan started to say is we haven't heard of situations like that. Generally, the FBI is just able to access email anyways. But with phones, don't provide your password. And the same response would be to anything else. If they ask to see your pictures, or if they ask to see your social media, or whatever it is that they ask for, is you should always say that you don't consent to a search of your phone, and that you'd like to consult with an attorney.
Okay, thank you, Lena. And I know you mentioned this earlier, Lena, but just a reminder, how do you take your name off the no-fly list?
And the process for the no-fly list would be filing. It would start with the filing of the DHS trip inquiry form. And once the response for the DHS trip inquiry form comes, probably about 2 to 3 months afterwards, you will be informed whether or not you are on the no-fly list. But at the same time, they do their own background review process of your designation. They may, through the DHS trip process, make a determination to remove your name from the no-fly list, or they may not. If they don't, then in that case, we have to file a lawsuit for you and challenge it in federal court to remove your name. Now, for people that are added on the no-fly list after they leave the United States and are effectively stranded abroad, in this case in Saudi Arabia, for those cases, if you're a U.S. citizen, you have the right to come back to the United States, and we have tremendous leverage in filing those cases. Those cases tend to be very successful. So if that happens, let us know right away, and we can get an emergency lawsuit filed for you, get you off at least temporarily, for you to be able to return to the United States and then litigate your no-fly list status afterwards to remove your name.
And Lena, you can take this one as well. These next two are related. Is there a way for someone to know if they are on the watch list? And then is there a way for them to know that they'll have difficulty traveling before they get to the airport?
So the easiest ways to know that you're on the watch list is if you've been prevented from boarding a flight before, if you've had difficulty checking in online at the kiosk and got the 4 S's on your boarding pass previously, that's another way to find out if you're on the watch list. And if you have to go through that clearance process that Hassan and I talked about, where airline personnel have to call a number, which is Department of Homeland Security, to get permission for you to get the boarding pass to fly. Those are the easiest ways to find out. If you are repeatedly pulled aside at the land border crossing when you're returning to the United States, if every time you cross back in, you're pulled aside and questioned, this is another way to tell that you're on the watch list. Not a single instance. I'm talking about multiple repeated instances. Now, with regards to the second part of that question is, can you anticipate whether you're going to have travel difficulties? A lot of times you can. If you've had those immigration applications for your spouse or for your, for family members that have just, or for yourself that have sat indefinitely, and when you inquire about it, the FBI says it's in an FBI name check process and it's just not moving anywhere. In that instance, we can pretty much predict you probably are on the watch list and you're probably going to have difficulties traveling. And when we file DHS trip or when we challenge the watch list designation, the immigration application tends to just get processed. Once we're able to remove your name from the watch list, you find that your immigration application also gets resolved. For people that had bank account closures, consult one of your chapters because you probably will have problems at the airport. If you've had Western Union block your wire transfers, that probably is also an indication that you're going to have travel difficulties. So if you're in doubt, if you think you might have travel difficulties, we can talk it through with you, go through your history with you, and we'll be able to help you determine whether or not you're on the watch list.
Okay, and we are just wrapping up. We have just a few more questions. The next one is, where is a good place to keep a hard copy of the Quran, as I don't want to keep it in the luggage because it may be disrespectful to the book?
So pro tip, my advice, although there's special significance, people do like to have the physical copy of the Quran. Nowadays, if you just get an iPad or any equivalent, you can really have copies of the Quran, Islamic books, and so much that you can keep within the iPad, the device. You can keep with you wherever you are in the airplane. It's much easier. You don't have to worry about having wudu. You don't have to worry about customs searching it and physically handling, the Holy Scripture. And then it's very convenient to have in the Haramain and in Arafah and in Hajj. You may want to have a backup battery in case to charge it. So just keep that in mind. If you can just avoid having to carry that altogether. I mean, alhamdulillah, when I went years ago when I was younger, I would have 4 or 5 different books, including my mushaf, and it was a bit difficult to carry around everywhere. Now, alhamdulillah, I go and I just go with my iPad, and it has everything. So I would transition to that. But otherwise, if you're going to travel with your mushaf, just keep it in a maybe a nice cloth or sheet that you have, and typically I would put it in a briefcase type or a like a laptop bag. Or if it's in a carry-on, in the top in the top zipper of it, if you really want to have a physical copy. But otherwise, I would just go with the digital. It's much more convenient for Hajj.
Okay, thank you, Hassan. And so this will be the last question. The question is, and we mentioned this earlier, but can you just remind everyone on TSA pre-check and global entry, and does applying for that help if someone is facing issues at the airport?
No, we've had issues, and Lena can add to this as well, but we actually had somebody who was always having trouble flying, and we had him apply for global entry, and he was denied global entry. And I'm not kidding, the letter said that he was a suspected terrorist when they sent him the denial. So we filed an appeal, and when we filed an appeal, they actually gave him global entry, and he stopped having issues since, and it expedited the process. So global entries for international travel, when you're coming back in, it allows you to go through an expedited line, an expedited process. And then a TSA pre-check, which if you get global entry, I believe you'll automatically get TSA pre-check as well. TSA pre-check allows you to go through the faster line and keep your shoes on, keep your jacket on, go through the metal detector and have not have to take out your laptop. I would highly recommend you apply for it, whether you are having issues or whether you're not. It doesn't matter. You should still apply for it. If you've been having issues, you may not get it, but even if you don't get it, you can always follow up with your local CAIR office or CAIR National to appeal the denial. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, not much to add to that, but just keep in mind that for the TSA pre-check and global entry, they do conduct a background check on you before they give you that. So not everybody is eligible to receive it. So if you have a criminal background or anything that might raise red flags, you're also going to be denied that. But if you're not on the watch list and you have a clean record, it's definitely worth filing because it's going to speed up the process. If you're on the watch list and you apply and you get denied, then let us know because that's something that we can help you with.
Okay, great. Thank you to both. So with that, we will go ahead and close the webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I know this information, it's a lot of information. It can sometimes seem overwhelming, but know, this has been mentioned throughout the presentation that we are here to help you. This is what CAIR does as a civil rights and advocacy organization. We have 40 attorneys that are across the country on staff that are ready to assist you to provide whatever help you need with any issues that you may face at the airport. So, if something does come up, if you do face any issues at the airport, just remain calm and know that you have a resource in the community that provides free legal services and is able to, inshallah, look into your case and provide you assistance. So we are here to help you. And I also want to mention this recording will be available on online. So we'll put it on YouTube. We'll send it on CAIR's email list. So if there's something that you missed, or you just want to review, you can please go ahead and give yourself a refresher. So again, thank you for joining us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your Hajj. And I will now turn it over to Hassan to do a closing dua, and then we will end the webinar. Thank you so much.
جزاكم الله خيرا. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. Ya Allah, accept from us, write us all amongst those who have an accepted Hajj, write us all amongst those whom you love, and make us all a means of sharing your love in this world and being a means of connecting people with the kalima of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and help us be steadfast in our faith and proud of our Muslim identity and proud adherence to the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and help us reflect the mercy that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to all humanity, and accept from all of us and keep us steadfast and forgive us. Barakallahu feekum. Please, all of you, remember us in your du'as as you travel. Remember the whole CAIR family, the entire Muslim community, the entire American Muslim community, and the entire Ummah. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.